phase feeding is really built on the idea that a sow's nutrient needs are not static through gestation and lactation. So in our case, we have focused in on gestation. We know that the biological demands change as pregnancy progresses, especially in the last third of gestation when fetal growth, mammary development, and blood volume are increasing. In terms of bump feeding, traditional bump feeding tries to meet those higher demands by increasing the amount of the same gestation diet, usually by adding 1 to 2 pounds of feed per day in late gestation, for example. However, that approach does increase daily intake of nutrients, but it increases them proportionally to the diet formulation. And from an energy standpoint, bump feeding may often end up oversupplying calories while still leaving those nutrients short of what the sow actually needs.
Welcome to Swine Canada, brought to you by Wasonetics. I'm Aline Remus, your host, and today's episode we'll be discussing the late gestation phase of prolific sows and how nutritional strategies during this critical period can influence productive outcomes, as well as nutritional biomarkers in sows and their progeny. To guide us through the science behind this topic, I'm joined today by Katlyn McClellan. She's a PhD candidate at South Dakota University, and she'll share research insights in the late gestation nutrition and its biological and practical applications. Thank you for joining us, Katlyn.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So could you just give us a little bit, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to work in this field?
Sure. So I'm originally from Southern California, and I really earned my interest in swine through the show pig world. I showed pigs from a young age all the way through college, and that experience is really where my passion for the swine industry began. I earned my bachelor's degree in animal science from California State University, Fresno, and after that moved on to South Dakota State University, where I completed my master's degree with a program of work focused on swine nutrition. I decided to continue on at SDSU with Dr. Eric Weaver here, and I'm currently finishing up my PhD in the same focus area. A major focus of my graduate research has been sow health and nutrition, and more specifically, I have done a lot of work on sow anemia over the years. My sow anemia research has really shaped many of the projects I've been involved in, including some of our more recent work on late gestation phase feeding.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's can really see the passion that you have for the field.
Fumonisins are one of the most prevalent mycotoxins in North America and can impact the performance of your feed and your pigs. Mycofix Fumezyme is the first ever CFIA-approved purified enzyme to specifically and irreversibly degrade fumonisins into non-toxic metabolites. Protect your pigs from fumonisins with Mycofix Fumezyme. Learn more at dsm-firmenich.com/mycofix.
So can you explain us a little bit what gestation phase feeding is and how it differs from our traditional bump feeding in gestation?
Yes, this is a good question. Phase feeding is really built on the idea that a sow's nutrient needs are not static through gestation and lactation. So in our case, we have focused in on gestation. We know that the biological demands change as pregnancy progresses, especially in the last third of gestation when fetal growth, mammary development, and blood volume are increasing. In terms of bump feeding, traditional bump feeding tries to meet those higher demands by increasing the amount of the same gestation diet, usually by adding 1 to 2 pounds of feed per day in late gestation, for example. However, that approach does increase daily intake of nutrients, but it increases them proportionally to the diet formulation. And from an energy standpoint, bump feeding may often end up oversupplying calories while still leaving those nutrients short of what the sow actually needs. Phase feeding, on the other hand, takes a different approach. So instead of feeding more of the same diet, we change the composition of the diet in late gestation. We can introduce a more nutrient-dense late gestation diet that's higher in amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. And the goal there is to better align nutrient supply with biological demands rather than relying solely on extra feed to compensate for a diet that does no longer meet her needs in late gestation.
Which to me it seems like extremely logical. In the field where I work, that is precision feeding, we not only are accounting for this difference in nutrient requirements over time, but also among the animals. So just changing the amounts won't solve the problem. What you're telling us is we actually need to tailor the diets for the different growth phases of the fetus and also to support maternal health, which is amazing. So can you explain us a little bit more about your rationale of working especially late gestation phase in sows?
Yeah, so I would say definitely the main driver was the anemia issue we are seeing in sows, which I believe has really exposed the biological cost of sows being short on nutrients. Through a few years of on-farm screening work, we have found that a high percentage of late gestating sows are anemic based on blood hemoglobin levels. And through our work, we have found that low hemoglobin sows have higher risks of prolonged farrowing, stillbirths, and even premature removal from the herd. So we started asking, why are sows becoming anemic and how can we better support them nutritionally? We know that today's sows are dramatically different than they were 20 to 30 years ago, and even different from just 5 to 10 years ago. And we are routinely seeing 16 or more pigs per litter. And in many herds, with our more prolific genotypes, a large proportion of sows are actually producing 20 or more pigs. So genetic progress has been incredible, but feeding systems really just haven't kept up. We're still feeding that static gestation diet. And in addition to this, the NRC estimates have not been meaningfully updated for modern prolific sows. We know that vitamins and trace mineral estimates for the sow have not materially changed in well over 2 decades. And so we acknowledge that the industry does formulate with nutrients above NRC estimates, but are we nutritionally preparing the sows well enough for demands of modern production? And I would say based on what we're seeing, especially with how prevalent anemia is in the sow herd, the answer is likely no. We know that a high proportion of sow death loss occurs around the farrowing period. So many sows may be entering farrowing in a deficient state, including, those key nutrients that are tied to iron metabolism. And that functional deficiency shows up as anemia when the sow faces her greatest metabolic challenge. So the core problems we really wanted to address here were, can we improve sow nutrient status before farrowing, and can better late gestation nutrition improve farrowing success? And to test this, we conducted a proof of concept study comparing 2 different diets. We fed an experimental diets from day 70 of gestation through farrowing. We had a control diet that was formulated to typical industry levels, fed all of gestation. And then our treatment diet was a late gestation, nutrient-enriched diet formulated with higher crude protein by increasing soybean meal to achieve higher amino acid concentrations. We also doubled the vitamins and trace minerals in the phase diet relative to the control, and we also added vitamin C into that diet. This treatment diet also had higher calcium and phosphorus included. So a lot of moving parts in our treatment diet. That was also a multi-cycle study, so we could evaluate, not just the immediate effects, but also the carryover impacts into the next parity.
And what is the most important findings that you had in this experiment?
So we found a lot of things, but there were really 3 big takeaways from this experiment. First, we improved sow nutrient status. That was a goal of this study. Sows fed the late gestation phase diet with higher amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, had better blood-based indicators of nutritional status going into farrowing and at weaning. Our blood hemoglobin values improved in the sows within just 40 days on the diet. Serum ferritin, which was our iron storage marker, was higher by weaning in the sows. Serum vitamin D status was also significantly improved in the sows, and our phase-fed sows also improved in body condition and back fat thickness prior to farrowing. So biologically, the late gestation nutrient-enriched diet moved the needle. And secondly, we saw improvements in farrowing and piglet outcomes. Our phase-fed sows had shorter farrowing durations. They had lower stillbirth rates. Their pigs had better micronutrient status, which included iron markers and vitamin D. And overall pig survival to weaning was improved in the progeny from our phase-fed sows. So the phase-fed sows actually weaned more pigs. And then third, the benefits really carried into that next cycle. So like I said, this was a multi-cycle study. Sows that were assigned to their diet in cycle 1 were reassigned to that diet in cycle 2. And so sows that received the late gestation diet in cycle 1 and again in cycle 2 actually maintained their shorter farrowing durations compared to control of about 78 minutes shorter. And our phase-fed sows had a dramatic increase in total and live board in that next cycle, whereas the controls did not achieve that improvement. The sows fed the phase diet increased in total born by 2.4 pigs and live born by 2.7 pigs compared to their previous cycle based on those metrics. And so that really suggests that we aren't just affecting one farrowing event by feeding the sow more nutrients in late gestation. We may be influencing longer-term reproductive performance and allowing the sow to achieve greater genetic potential.
So we're really, for me, a little recap in your experiment. So you actually have increased almost all the nutrients, right? You had increased crude protein with the intent of increasing amino acids, and you also increased minerals, macro and micro minerals, both, and you also changed vitamins, right?
Correct.
So you saw a change in several parameters. You listed some that might be linking to protein itself, and you have others that are clearly linked to minerals. If you had to pick based on your results and what you said, what you think is the main driver to this change, or you think is, of course, you have a confounded effect, but the whole idea is nutrition is never one thing alone, right? We all have multi-factors, and sometimes that is actually the best way to go about things. So if you have to tell me, well, based on my results, this is the main driver, which one would be?
We get this question very often, and it's a great question. I would say moving forward, it's going to be extremely important to determine which specific dietary components are driving these responses, so that our nutrient estimates can be further refined. Is it primarily the amino acids? Is it the minerals? Is it the vitamins? Or is it truly the combination? In terms of iron metabolism, we don't think about this often, but iron does not just depend on iron. It really depends on a balance of nutrients. That sow needs to be in proper nutrient balance in order to really fulfill iron uptake. And so it's hard for me to pinpoint one component of the diet. I think they're all important. They all have their special jobs, and so they really work together to improve nutrient status. And so I will say we'll likely have more detail on this in the future. I think there's just a lot more years of research ahead.
Yeah, and I think often we even forget that even when we're talking about amino acids and essential protein, if we don't have our cofactors that are vitamins and minerals right there to support, there is nothing really that there is no miracle happening, right? And what you said is it's really on point. Our research in terms of actual requirements for minerals and vitamins is not really up to date. We're using, even if you take what we have in the NRC and you go back, yeah, it's 20 years old, but actually the reference itself that they used 20 years ago was already old there. So I think we have so much work to do, and what you're doing it's fundamental for us to get answers in that sense. But moving based on what you found, if a producer wanted to implement late gestation phase on their farm, what would that look like? How he can do that in practice?
This is another great question. The biggest practical limitation is that most farms only have that single feed line. So they don't currently have an easy way to deliver two different gestation diets. And because of that, the most straightforward option would be to, of course, put in that second feed line. And that obviously requires some capital investment, but it's probably the cleanest long-term solution to this. I do think electronic sow feeding systems will hopefully become more common in farms over the years based on the benefits. ESFs give farms the ability to deliver different diets to sows. And, if adding extra infrastructure is not an option, top dressing of key nutrients during late gestation can be considered if done correctly. Economically, the late gestation diet is, of course, going to be more expensive per ton relative to a standard gestation diet. But when you balance the cost against potential improvements in, pig survival and sow retention, that return on investment can be very attractive.
You touched a little bit in the use of electronic sow feeding. So have you used automated feeders? How did you deliver your treatments?
They were delivered through ESFs.
And in terms, do you have any data in terms of sow behavior, for example, that you have seen something interesting? Because normally when we use this type of equipment and we're changing nutrients in the diets, often we also will see a difference in behavior, the way they're eating. Have you had the opportunity to look into that?
That's a great comment. And we've been asked that before if we've done any behavior assessment. And the answer is no. I will say in our future work and our current work, that's definitely in the plans, is to look at more detailed behavior assessment. We, of course, have observed things, just subjectively being in the farm often and going through these trials. But yes, I think that's a definite thing to look at in the future.
And based on what you found, what is the next step for your research?
We kind of covered it. There's still several important questions, and I've got quite a bit of research ahead. We, of course, need larger multi-farm studies powered to evaluate those metrics such as pigs weaned per sow, sow removals, in order to feed into a full economic analysis to determine if late gestation phase feeding is truly worth the benefits. Since completing this work, we have implemented late gestation phase feeding on a larger commercial scale, and this data isn't currently available, but we have observed meaningful improvements in sow mortality when sows are fed that nutrient-enriched diet in late gestation. And again, moving forward, it will be really important to determine which specific dietary components are driving those responses.
And I actually will just back a little bit, because you actually said that your study was multi-cycle, right? You had follow-up these animals, and you saw that was a persistent effect. Have you also, you touched a little bit about the piglets, but can you give some numbers in terms of total born and stillbirth and piglet viability, if you have observed something interesting in your treatments? And I'll give you the back of my question is because you're talking about maybe selling that second line and so on. And I'm wondering if by having different phase feeding for the sows, improving their nutrition over life, you also might have the ability to improve piglet viability and also sow longevity. So it's what I have in the back of my mind with my question. I prefer to give you the full background and see if there is any of that in your future research that you'll be looking into and maybe consider this, like the sow longevity and how we can help actually to pay for these changes in diet with these improvements or possible improvements. I'm guessing that you have improvements.
Yeah, so like I said, those main metrics are going to be pigs weaned, number of pigs weaned per sow, and then sow longevity, so, sow retention. And, this was a really small scale study. I didn't mention that. This was a 70 sow study. So we had 35 sows per treatment. So very difficult to evaluate, differences in sow retention. In our small scale study, definitely saw differences in sow retention. But as I stated, we need larger scaled work in order to really determine if we can achieve a better sow longevity, because sow mortality is really a driver behind most of the sow work that comes out of our group. And in terms of piglet viability in this study, our farm here that we run these research trials at are very representative of industry, numbers. And so in cycle 1, these females were pretty representative of what we typically see. They both treatments achieved 16 total born. They both weaned, 13 to 14 pigs, but that phase fed group actually weaned one more pig than the control. And so that really, adds to your benefits there in offsetting costs of the diet. We had better survival to weaning by at least 5%. And so they were able to achieve an extra pig at weaning. And so that would really translate into your economic benefits. And then in terms of sow retention, if we could get the sow through farrowing and get her to recover at a much faster rate and in a better nutritional status to where she is not leaving that farrowing room completely depleted, the genetic potential we observed in those phase-fed sows was phenomenal. And so I think a lot of opportunity is there in order to really find strategies to improve longevity in the sow.
Yeah, I do believe so. I agree. Like I have been, I do not specifically work with sows, but I have been reading and getting some insights in that. And I think what you said is like, there is only one way that we can improve this sow longevity. And I think one of the keys is into nutrition and better feeding ourselves, because if we're doing phase feeding for almost anything, why we're not doing for our gestation cells that are clearly passing by different phases of gestation, which we ourselves classify in gestation phases, right? We can do better. Of course, I also think we do have to start to introduce fiber for these cells as well. I think we will have to find ways to do it because overall it will improve their nutrient digestion overall. How we're going to do that is another completely different story, but I think we'll be probably going there in some moment, but definitely revisiting all nutrient requirements as you've been doing. You're talking about moving to large scale, and if I guessed right, you started a large scale trial, right? So you already are seeing some of the difficulties of moving to large scale. So if you have to give a suggestion, a tip to people that want to implement late gestation diets, what are the things that they have to be aware? What are the possible risks that they should be looking out or the difficulties that they may face?
Yeah, in terms of me being the researcher and trying to implement these studies on a larger scale, there's definitely a lot of limitations that come with it and challenges. I would say for us, we've had a lot of success finding groups of people that are passionate about this topic, including farms. And I think finding a farm that actually wants to see change and they're wanting to improve on their sow mortality number, that really helps. The phase feeding sows is definitely an extra task added to the farm, assigning sows, making sure they receive that diet at, by this X day throughout gestation. It could be a little bit of a learning curve at first. And so also, another challenge is making sure that the correct diet gets delivered to, the correct bin and doing those kind of logistical checks. And so I think it could be, a challenge, but it's a challenge worth, enduring, I would say, if we can truly see benefits in our sow herds.
Thank you so much, Katlyn. It's been fantastic, and I think you're doing a great work. I can't wait to see more of your results.
It's time for our famous three.
We're heading now towards the end of our episode. So I will ask you our famous three questions. And the number one is, what is your go-to resource in nutrition, and especially in sow nutrition?
Yeah, so aside from the usual research tools and textbooks I use every day, this might be an out there response, but I'd say LinkedIn is actually one of my biggest practical resources. And that might be a very Gen Z answer of me, but it's really where I follow what producers, nutritionists, and veterinarians are talking about in real time. And it truly helps me stay connected to the industry on a daily basis.
I actually, maybe it's a Gen Z, but I also use a lot, and I do think is a very effective tool actually to get what we're doing out there and get feedback in real time, because many times we think, wow, here's this result, it's great. And then you get feedback and then plants that seed of doubt and pushes you to do better, because there is people there doing that in real life, in real time, and telling you what works and doesn't. So honestly, thank you for saying that. And out of academia, Is there any book or movie or research that you recommend that you enjoy?
Yes, a book that I would recommend to probably anyone is called Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I've read this book a couple of times now, and really as someone who prioritizes becoming a better leader every day, it really contains helpful insight about leadership and teamwork, things that are really important in both the research setting and swine industry, just as they are anywhere else in life.
That's great. Thank you. And last but not least, what do you think makes, especially based on your last question, I think you're probably going to come with leadership ideas, but what is that make a professional that to become successful versus those that are not? What are the characteristics associated to them?
Yeah, so from my perspective as a graduate student, I think success in this industry is really less about brilliance and more about follow through. A lot of people have great ideas, but many times the professionals who truly stand out are the ones who execute those ideas. They finish what they start. They pay attention to details and they stay consistent when nobody is watching. And so I think reliability and accountability can go a really long way in this industry. And I think that's what really separates the good from the great.
Wow, that is a fantastic answer. Thank you for that insight. Katlyn, thank you so much for sharing your research with us and sharing your time. Was really great to have you here with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So that concludes another episode of Swine Canada presented by Wise Genetics. Thank you for joining us today. And do not forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated to the episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback is very important to us. Until next time, I'm Aline Ramos from Swine Canada, signing off.